The Karagar. Ben's family had lived near the bayou of Louisiana for as long as he could remember. His mother had grown up in a small house, literally surrounded by swampland, infested with gators and venomous snakes. But when she met Ben's father, they moved to a small suburban neighborhood nearby. Ben had just graduated middle school and had gotten out for summer vacation, so his parents said that if he wanted to, he could stay out at his grandma's house for a week with a friend to celebrate. Ben decided to take his friend Kyle. They had been friends since first grade, and Kyle had talked about how he wanted to go fishing in the bayou sometime with him, so it seemed perfect. They picked their things and left the day after school had ended. Ben had not been to his grandma's in a long time, but his mother remembered the way there perfectly. It was a long, muddy stretch of road through the murky swampland, but after a while they drove up to a pleasant-looking house with a small but nicely kept front yard. His grandma was just the way he remembered her, a plump, cheerful elderly woman who was quick to offer to cook for the two boys as soon as they showed up. That night, after a big Southern-style meal, Ben's grandma began to tell the two boys all sorts of stories about growing up in the bayou. She told them stories of raising Ben's mother, but she also told them old ghost stories from the swamps that she had grown up with. One story in particular caught Ben's attention. "My father used to tell of a swamp monster called the Karagar," she said. "He even claimed to see it once when he was a boy. He said it had scaly skin like an alligator, but it stood upright like a man." The boys leaned in as she told the story of how the Karagar would wander the swamps both day and night, looking for children to grab and take back to its lair, where it would devour them alive. "My father said he was out fishing one evening," she continued. "He was just about to pull his line in and go home for the night when the creature's head popped out of the water in front of him. He said it had skin like an alligator's and bright yellow eyes that almost seemed to glow in the dark. It slowly raised itself from the swamp and began to walk towards my father, but he turned and ran home as fast as he could." "Do you actually believe that story about your great-grandpa?" Kyle asked Ben as they lay in their beds later that night. "Nah," Ben said. "Old people are always making up stories to scare kids like us." The next day, Ben and Kyle got up later than they wanted to, so they were in a hurry to get into their grandma's old metal boat and head into the swamp. "You boys better be careful," she said as they rushed out the door. "Stay away from any alligators." "Of course, Grandma," Ben shouted back. They loaded all their fishing gear into the back of the little boat and started the motor. They had planned on staying in the swamp most of the day, so Ben's grandma had packed them some sandwiches. After lunch, they decided to check out an area where the swamp emptied into a big open lake. There was a small island in the middle of the lake that caught Kyle's attention. "Let's dock the boat there and check it out," he told Ben. "I don't know," Ben said. "If we don't head back now, we might not get back till after dark." "Come on," Kyle said. "It'll just be a quick stop. What if there's something cool on the island, like an abandoned boat or something?" Ben told him they would stop only for a little bit, so they docked the boat and got out. "Watch out for snakes," Ben said. But Kyle was running way ahead of him. The two boys investigated the island until they found themselves on the exact opposite side of where they had left the boat. "There's nothing cool here," Ben said. "Let's go back." "Let's just cut across the middle of the island," Kyle said. "It's not very weedy, and it'll take much less time than walking all the way back around." As the two boys walked across the island, the sun began to set, and Ben began to worry that they wouldn't make it back to his grandma's house in time. "We really need to hurry, Kyle," Ben said, looking up. But Kyle was nowhere in sight. Ben stopped walking and called out to him, but there was no answer. Ben ran through the brush ahead of him quickly and found Kyle staring into the entrance of a dark cave. "Look at this," Kyle said with excitement. "Let's check it out." "We don't have time," Ben said. But Kyle had already entered the cave. Reluctantly, Ben followed him inside. It was so dark in there that Ben had to feel his way around to keep from running into things. It was cold in the cave, and even the smallest sounds would echo off the walls with great volume. The tiniest drips of water hitting the ground sounded like someone was throwing rocks at the walls. Ben could hear Kyle's footsteps ahead of him. He tried to walk faster to catch up, but in his hurry, he hit his head on a low-hanging rock. Ben fell to the ground with a groan, grabbing his head to see if it was bleeding. Then he noticed something strange. There was something laying all over the cave floor. He felt around and grabbed one of the things he had laid on. He felt it over for a moment or two, then he let out a gasp. He could not be sure, but it almost felt like he was holding a human skull. Ben dropped the object and stood up. He did not hear Kyle's footsteps anymore. "Kyle!" he called out, but there was no answer. "Kyle, come on!" he shouted. "We need to go!" Again there was no answer. Ben began to slowly back away towards the entrance of the cave. It was still black as pitch in there, so he still had to feel along the walls for guidance. "Kyle, come out of there!" he called again, his voice shaking. Everything was silent. Just then, Ben heard something else coming from the inside of the cave. It sounded like footsteps. At first, Ben thought it might be Kyle. But the footsteps were heavier, and they were followed by the sounds of harsh, heavy breathing. Then Ben heard a sound that made his blood run cold. A low growl came from the direction of the footsteps, and whatever was making the sound was getting closer and closer. Ben turned and ran for the mouth of the cave as fast as he could. He fell down once and scraped his knee, but he got up quickly and ran and ran and ran until he thought his lungs were going to explode. When he finally reached the boat, he turned back towards the trees in the middle of the island. Ben looked in horror as whatever had been chasing him stopped at the tree line and watched him. It had the skin of an alligator, but was standing on two legs like a man. It stared at him with its glowing yellow eyes from the shadows. Then it was gone. Later that night, the police searched the island and the swamp around the island. They found the cave and several old skeletons inside that they said could belong to any missing people from the last few years, but they found no trace of Kyle. They decided to question Ben about it the next day, but he never spoke. He never spoke ever again.